Okay, well, on that note, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody, especially Jonathan and Christine, but also good morning to everybody tuning in from your home in your pajamas, or if you're Andy, from your office in your pajamas, whatever you may be doing. Appreciate you guys chiming in, taking some time out of your day to do that. So we're excited today to talk with Jonathon Bates, learn more about the University of Utah's Research Park and their new vision for a live, work, learn, dare we say, play environment on campus. I think most of us that are familiar to some degree with what's going on up there are pretty excited to hear more about what that looks like and find out how that potentially impacts everything else that's going around not only on campus, but just in the greater Salt Lake community, especially from a real estate standpoint. So really quickly, before we get to the exciting stuff, we do need to make sure that we talk about some of our sponsors. So a big thank you to our platinum sponsor, who is Zions Bank, all of our silver sponsors, who are Layton Construction, Hamilton Partners, Big D Construction, Colliers, Mortensen, and CBRE, and as well to our bronze sponsors, Harris Company and Newmark Knight Frank. And also a special thank you to today's sponsor, who is GSBS Architecture. And I'd love to introduce Christine Richmond from GSBS. Christine, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just give us a couple of comments about GSBS.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of GSBS Architects, welcome to the online event to discuss the future of Research Park at the University of Utah. I'm Christine Richmond, a principal at GSBS and director of our planning practice. We, like you, are watching the redevelopment of Research Park with great interest. We've been involved in the design of some of the buildings there over the years, as well as the Utah Museum of Natural History right next door. There's no other opportunity quite like Research Park, where we can create a modern live-work environment so close to the university, to downtown, and to mountain recreation. We all want it to emerge as a model mixed-use development that's sensitive to the environment, benefits the entire neighborhood, and creates an exciting setting for the next generation of innovation from the U. Go Utes! Thanks to NAIOP, to Jonathan, and to all of you for joining GSBS Architects for today's important discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, GSBS, and all of our sponsors. We couldn't do what we do at NAIOP without you. And also thank you, audience, for tuning in today. So on that note, let's get into this. My name is Josh Caldwell. I represent Mortensen Salt Lake City and am spearheading our efforts in our office here. But I'm also a member of the NAIOP Utah board, and as my role in that is over programs and events, I have the awesome opportunity to be able to moderate some of our NAIOP live events and work with folks in the industry like Jonathan and talk to and through what some of these projects and some of these developments that are most impactful in our community are looking like. And so as we get into this, a couple of quick housekeeping notes for everybody tuning in. During the presentation portion of today's conversation, Jonathan will be pausing and we will have some live poll questions. Please pay attention. We would love some immediate feedback from you guys, the audience, just to get a little bit more about what questions are being answered, how they're being answered, what your thoughts are on what this vision up on campus looks like. Also, there is a chat function for your questions. So please, if you have questions during the conversation, feel free to ask those in the chat. We will collect those, and given time at the end of the discussion, we'll do our best to ask and answer as many of those as possible. So don't be shy about asking questions as we go through this. I'm sure everybody's interested to hear what Jonathan has to say, and it's really going to, I think, beg a lot more interest in what they're doing, and that's probably going to bring up some questions. So really quickly, I've been thrilled to be able to have these conversations with Jonathan, learn more about what the vision looks like. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with what this vision is that we keep talking about, but I'm also betting a lot of you didn't realize that since 1968, 50% of the current life science jobs in Utah trace back to the University of Utah's research park. And today, 48 companies and 81 university departments with a combined workforce totaling more than 14,000 call Research Park home. I had no idea. And I want to hear more from Jonathon about what that means, how that's transpired, and what this overall development is continuing to look like today, tomorrow, 20 years from today. So with that, today's guest is Jonathon Bates. Jonathon is the Executive Director for the Department of Real Estate at University of Utah, and he's been instrumental in driving this vision for Research Park's new master plan, and we're lucky to have you with us. Thank you, Jonathon. As we get started, and just as a way to kick off, Jonathon, can you take a few minutes and give us just a high-level picture of what Research Park's vision wants to look like?
Sure, Josh, and thank you for that introduction. I'd have to acknowledge I am still getting used to this new reality of presenting to and talking to my computer monitor in my office or in my home. So excuse me if it comes across a little bit rough, but I'm excited to be here with you today and to share what truly is a work in progress, setting a framework that we can use to strategically respond to development opportunities for the next 50 years. I like to kick off this conversation with just a little bit of history. So Research Park was established back in 1968 through a land grant from the federal government, which required the university and the state to do a couple things. One of those was to set aside the southeast corner of that land grant for an addition to Pioneer Monument State Park. The other was to establish the state arboretum, which is Red Butte Garden. And then finally, the rest of the balance of the land, which is about 320 acres, was set aside for academic expansion, including the establishment of a research park. So the state legislature also supported the concept of a research park through some code that did a couple things. First, it stated that it is the public interest of the state and its citizens and commerce to establish this research park. And then it also allowed the establishment of the nonprofit University of Utah Research Foundation to administer Research Park. The Board of Regents of Higher Education clarified their support as well through their policy R491. And I find it interesting because it specifically states that research parks are master planned property and buildings designed primarily to attract and promote the economic growth and development of Utah by encouraging interaction of Utah's research universities with and the resulting transfer of university research and technology to the private sector for the creation of jobs and increase of state revenues. So not only is Research Park an integral part of our research and academic mission as a higher education institution and the flagship institution for the state, but it's an integral anchor for economic development, commercialization, and entrepreneurship for Salt Lake City, the region, and our state. So we kicked off this master planning and visioning process about 15 months ago. And some additional details that supported that decision. Again, Research Park is about 320 acres. Currently, we have about 4.5 million square feet developed, and historically, the vacancy rate of that space has been extremely low. Even in economic downturns or recessions, we have experienced vacancy rates below 5% on average. Today, our vacancy rate is below 1%. The last time we did a survey of our building owners, there was less than 4,000 square feet of available space for companies to grow in or occupy. As Josh mentioned, we've got about 14,000 employees that come in to work each day in Research Park. 60% of those are non-university. And so through our visioning process, we've had some great conversations, did some market sounding, talked to our stakeholders, And we had it reaffirmed that companies, specifically companies coming out of the university, early stage companies, want to be located as close to the academic and research campus as they can. We also did some market demand studies that affirm that people would like to explore the opportunity to live within Research Park. And it's really important, again, to get in as close as they can to those in-demand destinations and those support services that those early stage companies find through the institution. And so as we look at Research Park physically today, you can see that a lot of that 320 acres, almost 100 acres to be precise, is asphalt parking lot. And that is really what we have identified as our development opportunity. We need to change the dynamic around transit, transportation, and parking, open up those spaces for development opportunities, and continue to grow the entrepreneurship and commercialization foundation that Research Park represents. To do that, okay, I think I actually skipped my first poll, so I apologize for that. But you should see it now. So if we can take a few questions, we're really interested to see of the audience, how many of you have explored or done business with the University of Utah or a company within Research Park? So we'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer that, and then we'll share the results.
Make sure to click submit, everybody.
So about 5 seconds left. Looks like we've got most everybody. So I'm not shocked by these results. I think it just affirms that from a real estate standpoint, which most of you are involved in the real estate industry, people have done business with companies or with the university, specifically around Research Park. It looks like 82% of you, or 55 individuals from the roughly 67 that responded, have done business here. That's not surprising to me. I hope that's not surprising to all of you. So I mentioned earlier that we're evaluating the allowable land uses in Research Park, specifically around residential. Today, your experience in Research Park is of office and laboratory buildings, parking lots, sidewalks on most of the roadways, but there's not a large density of retail, and there's no residential opportunities beyond the family student apartment complex that we call the East Village. And so again, we're looking at the potential for that housing opportunity in Research Park, specifically for individuals that work for the university or work for the companies that call Research Park home. And so again, as we look at this next 50 years for Research Park, we've also worked to identify immediate phase development opportunities, and then also opportunities over 10 and 20 years. Over the next 5 years, we've really spent a lot of time focusing on opportunities to strengthen and revise the environment around the Wakara and Chipeta intersection. We're working to redevelop 375 and 391 Chipeta with our existing ground lessee in that area to be our first mixed-use development. We're looking at our first community-based parking structure. We're also looking at bringing a spring that currently comes down next to the Huntsman corporate building to Colorado and dumps into a storm drain. How could we better embrace that natural feature, bring it down through the core of Research Park, and make it a natural amenity as well as a stormwater treatment opportunity, thereby better embracing some of the ecological features within the park. In the next phase of development, we're looking at increasing that transit accessibility concept. We're hoping to open up what we're calling the Airpine Connector to create another perforation or connection between main campus and Mario Capecchi and the university, adjacent to the Marriott Hotel, connecting to Airpine. making that a transit corridor for biking, pedestrians, and transit solutions. It would not be available for vehicular traffic. Again, we're bringing that Daylit Creek potentially down what we're calling the social spine, a highly active, higher density area focused on that pedestrian, bicycle, and active transportation component, with housing, lab, and office developments along it, connecting with what we're calling the green spine, what we'd like to see as our central park for Research Park, connecting potentially Matheson State Park to the riparian corridor and Red Butte Creek, making it very walkable, active, outdoor, inviting space. Again, increasing access to mobility hubs where individuals can find a higher density of accessibility to shared transit solutions. And then increasing those road right-of-ways, increasing the number of intersections that you see within Research Park, again, making it much more inviting for pedestrian and active transit use. And then the final phase, we're actually working strategically to set aside land and right-of-way for heavy lift transit improvements, such as the potential for a tracks extension along that Airpine connector into Research Park. We truly believe that transit-oriented development in Research Park is going to unlock the development potential long-term. So I think I also missed our next poll solution. So I'm going to go back a couple slides and we're going to ask our second poll, which is focused on housing. So how important is the inclusion of a housing land use to the long-term vitality and vibrancy of the Research Park? So again, we're going to give about 30 seconds for people to respond. Got about 5 seconds left. Definitely interested in everybody's feedback. Very interesting results for me. About 51% of you identify it as very important, 39% somewhat important, and 10% not important. I find those very interesting. I hope you do as well. So again, we truly are, through this process, looking at and working diligently to embrace the unique geographic aspects of our location. We truly are inspired by our environment, and we want to make that environment and the ecological framework of Research Park our calling card. We want to do that by protecting and revitalizing that high-value habitat like Red Butte Creek, creating safe, comfortable, and sustainable streets, establishing that permanent heart of the park, that active, outdoor, engaging environment where the social spine and the green spine connect. And then an exciting concept that I'm excited about is that daylighting of the Colorado Spring, taking that spring that currently dumps into the stormwater system, bringing it above ground, making it a natural, walkable, inviting outdoor amenity to the park and to the community, and bringing it down through the core of Research Park. Again, Research Park is an important component of Utah's innovation economy, and we want to stay focused on that research and commercialization and entrepreneurship aspect. We want to make sure that we expand the types of employment spaces. We want to make those spaces versatile, vibrant, and supportive to those emerging companies, where companies coming out of the university can find space that can be easily adaptable to their new concepts of working and their new solutions for entrepreneurship. So those co-working spaces, the wet lab accessible incubator spaces. We also feel like allowing housing development helps us in several areas, such as mitigating our impacts on traffic, creating that 24/7, 365-day-a-year vibrancy, and then creating that Research Park innovation front, really the storefront of the commercialization process in Research Park, and being very strategic about creating those convening spaces and those third places where people within industry can collide and interact with our researchers, our faculty, and our staff and students. And we're embracing the one you, one community aspect. We want to make sure that we're keeping the adjacent community in our thought process. We want to connect nearby residents with jobs within the district. We want to continue to provide specialized workforce development, lifelong learning opportunities. We want to create retail amenities that are not only valuable to our internal stakeholders and occupants, but are amenities to our adjacent neighborhoods, and deliver safe, activated, accessible public spaces. Again, we really feel that transit and unlocking that transit-oriented community is critical to further development. We want to focus on establishing those mobility hubs, implementing a Park Once strategy supported by a community-based transportation management association, building parking structures focused on community-based solutions, prioritizing our streets for emerging mobility, and investing in big transit improvements long-term. And this is where we've got our third and final poll question. How important is increased transit access to the future development potential of Research Park? So again, 30 seconds. We're very interested in your feedback. Just a few more seconds. I don't think this one's going to be, the results of this is going to be surprising to many people. 100% of those that responded felt that transit was important in some level to the future development of Research Park, and we strongly feel the same way. We've spent a lot of time exploring ways to improve transit accessibility. So how do we plan a new resilient future together? Again, we're looking at 50 years of development. We want to lead out with sustainability and ecological design. We want to focus on and encourage net zero energy development. When we talk about housing, we want to ensure that we plant our flag in creating equitable solutions to housing for our workforce. So we're exploring requiring affordable units and new development. We want to look at establishing dark sky ordinances and other environmental regulations that, again, help us push out and lead out from a sustainability and ecological design standpoint. And then through this work from home and COVID-19 experience, we're learning even more the importance of creating adaptable, versatile, activated outdoor spaces where people can that can accommodate classrooms, meetings, conferences, workspaces in that outdoor environment. And then again, our landscape, our geographic location on the foothills, we want to celebrate this landscape. We want to protect those view corridors so that when you're walking down Bonneville Shoreline Trail, you still get a nice uninterrupted view of the Oakers and the valley and downtown. We want to mold the urban form so that we've got a village core, a core support area, and then that village buffer where we're being very cognizant about our single family home neighborhoods adjacent to us. Again, we're investing a lot of time in those transit and transportation initiatives and the social spine and green spine and those mobility hubs, the convergence hall with that convening space, that bumpability factor, where we bring those industry employees into close proximity with our faculty, staff, and researchers, embracing the city's 9-line trail along Sunnyside. Again, some additional viewpoints of heights that we're testing, view corridors that we're testing, and levels of density that we're exploring. Again, this is a 50-year plan. It's a framework. It's not a guaranteed development plan for the university, but we want to ensure we have this framework to strategically think about development and respond to development as it occurs. And then very importantly to many of us is we want to respect those established, vibrant neighborhoods. We want to break down the silo that you fill with Research Park today, include the park into the broader fabric of the community. I mentioned the 9-line trail extension that Salt Lake City is working on, ensuring that development steps down to Sunnyside. We're talking about stacked townhouses and a very inviting transition area from the core of Research Park to those neighborhoods, maintaining that landscape buffer, and then advocating for safer, more human scale streets on Sunnyside and even Foothill. And so with that, I'll wrap up the presentation and open it up for some Q&A.
Awesome. Jonathan, thank you so much. I mean, I've had the luxury of being able to see this presentation a few times now, and it gets more and more exciting the more real it feels like it's getting. So a couple of questions that we have, and then again, everybody who's listening in or watching, make sure that if you do have questions, feel free to leave those in either the chat or the Q&A function of Zoom. I actually have also received a few texts, questions that hopefully we can get to, though some of you, I'm not sure how you got my phone number. But in the meantime, Jonathan, thanks again for all of this. I mean, really kind of just to kick off the Q&A, what do you see as the biggest change we can expect coming to Research Park?
Well, again, this is a work in progress, but we are giving serious thought to the potential for the insertion of housing. And that housing, we can expect to see impacts related to that 24/7, 365-day-a-year occupancy. It's the hope that this would assist in increasing the viability of neighborhood scale retail opportunities, increase safety and security, elevate access to active transportation and transit solutions, and ultimately, again, increase that bumpability index between faculty, staff, researchers, students, and our industry partners that conduct business in Research Park.
I mean, speaking to that, do you have a sense then what the housing unit in total wants to look like? Like how many units do you think ultimately could be included in this master plan?
So we haven't gotten down to actual unit counts. We did do some demand studies within the last 12 months to help us inform the viability of housing. And there's absolutely a demand for housing here. We want to strategically think about how that's developed if we do adopt and allow that type of land use. I think we have demand in the near term for 300 to 400 units of development over the next 5 years. And then we want to respond again with a framework that allows us to better strategically evaluate opportunities for those mixed use type developments long term.
So, okay. So with that in mind then, and just kind of taking a step back, obviously you talked a little bit about the history of Research Park. We kind of touched on a few statistics, but what ultimately would you say was the catalyst for change that was kind of instrumental in kicking off what is this new master plan?
So I mentioned earlier, Research Park turned 50 years old in 2018, and by all real estate and economic impact measures, it has been a success. Again, I referenced the average vacancy rate of below 5%. However, the approach the institutions are taking to increase innovation and commercialization, as well as monetization of real estate assets, has changed since the last time we did a master plan update in 1982. And it's critical for the U to take a serious look at ensuring the vibrancy and vitality of this asset over the next 50 years and evaluate whether or not some of those new concepts and new ideas like housing, like density, like walkability, like activated outdoor spaces works for us and works for our environment and stakeholders.
Okay, so to me, and I think maybe a lot of people are going to have a similar level of excitement here. I think what's really what kind of sets off what is unique about this compared to some of maybe your peer institutions is really this idea of this live work community aspect. Can you talk a little bit why that live work community such as a Lassonde is such a large focus and what that means for this vision?
Innovation and innovative thought is not an 8 to 5 operation. It doesn't stop when you leave the office, and individuals want a convenient geographic solution to create that work-life balance. Again, I love that term bumpability, and bumpability happens 24/7, 365 days a year. Also, live work communities assist in creating that 15-minute walkable environment that I talked about before, and that I think Salt Lake City's mayor and Nick Norris, the planning director, talk about as well. And so creating a locale where residents can get to work, home, shopping, education, cultural amenities within that 15-minute walk, bike, or transit trip. I think that's important. That's something we're working very hard to embrace in this planning exercise.
So, okay, I love where you're headed with that. I want to say one big question that probably a lot of people have, I know it's not necessarily a negative, but it is a consideration, is with all of this added density that you're talking about on campus, what does that look like from a public transport evolution standpoint? And what is, how does that impact the traffic on campus and surrounding areas? Ultimately, what do you see that looking like when everything is complete?
To do some of the work and to be aspirational in some of our thinking around this live, work, play, learn environment, it's important that we think about Research Park as a transit-oriented development. We've had some very exciting conversations with WFRC, UDOT, UTA. We've been leading out with some of these concepts around a tracks extension and pulling bus rapid transit solutions up off of Foothill into Research Park, creating that airpin connector where those transit solutions can quickly go over to main campus and the health sciences. We need to revolutionize our thinking about transit and transportation and parking in Research Park to make these concepts and to embrace these development opportunities. It's critical. We don't control all of that. Again, there's a lot of regional players in those conversations, but we can be aspirational in our thinking, in our planning documents. We can plant a flag and lead out on dedicating right-of-way and preserving right-of-way for those future opportunities. And we're doing that. We acknowledge being in this northeast corner of the valley that access and transit are critical to further development. Main campus has embraced tracks and ridership has been great. We want to do the same thing and create those same opportunities for our workforce and our stakeholders in Research Park.
I think that that great answer. Thank you for enlightening a little bit more on that. I think that's going to be probably something that people are going to be aware of and watching over the next couple of years as this continues to evolve. And considering that, you're talking today obviously to an audience that is very real estate focused, and there are a lot of developers on the line right now listening, as well as those of us who are members of the greater Utah and Salt Lake City real estate community. Can you tell me, what does it look like for private developers? What sort of opportunities will there be for private developers to be involved in this overall development?
So historically, Research Park has relied heavily on those private-public partnerships for development. We don't see that going away. The university, our research foundation, we're not in the business of running mixed-use developments or residential housing solutions beyond those for our students. I don't see us wanting to do that in the future. I see us relying heavily on private interest and private development structured under ground leases. Again, a component of that land grant from the federal government to the university for Research Park limits our ability or eliminates our ability to sell land. So all private development in the park will continue to be done under ground leases. And I think the majority of the development that we've shared in these planning documents will be done through private-public partnerships between a private developer and the institution. So there's huge opportunity for the development community.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's already a model that, as you discussed, is in use, has been in use, and will continue to be in use. Presumably, there's openness from the university for flexibility in what that model ultimately looks like moving down the road. But I guess in theory, what I'm hearing you say is there's a high appetite for involvement with the private community who continue to walk hand in hand down this path with that community and be available to opportunities to partner on various aspects of this project.
Absolutely. I think it's that partnership between private and public institutions is key to this development potential.
Okay. So before we get into, and we've got a lot of questions, it's looking like we've got about 20 minutes, which should be enough time to talk about through a number of these things. But I do have one more question from my side for you, Jonathan, and that is, what do you want, again, considering your audience, and this is a NAIOP event, which means a lot of all real estate, a lot of brokers, developers, landowners, bankers, architects, contractors, you name it. What do you want that industry at large to know if there was one thing they needed to walk away from this conversation with?
We want to know what you think. This, again, is a work in process. It's not done. We want to know what our stakeholders think, and the development community is a key one. Again, that private-public partnership, ensuring that we create a framework that makes development attractive is important to us. I am more than happy to make myself available to engage in conversation. I encourage feedback. I encourage questions. We want to learn what our development partners in the real estate community wants to see happen here as well. And we want to do what we can to embrace the concepts there. That's the entire essence of Research Park in an innovation district, is exploring new creative ways to get work done. And we want to embrace that. I embrace that. So bring it on. Bring your questions on. Reach out. Let us know what you think. Let us know where you feel we can improve things. There's challenges. We share those challenges. And together we can work and collaborate on solutions that not only will work for Research Park and the University of Utah, but our hope is that we can apply it to communities throughout the state, and develop things in a creative, more environmentally sustainable way.
Awesome. Okay, so one last quick note to everybody listening, chiming in. If you have questions, now's the time to ask them. We'll do our best to answer and ask as many of them as possible. Apologies if we don't get to yours, but also feel free to send those to us, and we can distribute to Jonathan if it's something that you would like him to address directly. I'm going to go ahead and start, Jonathan, with what isn't, I wouldn't call it a curveball or even a hardball, but it is, I think, something that's on a number of people's minds, and it's a concern that the original intent for Research Park really was that this is going to be a home for, essentially, for research activities, hence the name. And there are a number of implications that come along with what that means. And my understanding, and I think where this first question is coming from, is that the concern is, how do you, and maybe let me just ask it this way, Jonathan, how do you address any concern about how the university will keep its commitments to its neighbors and the community, to the intent of being a park for research, and not allow this to turn into and morph into something that it wasn't originally intending to be?
I think it's a great question, and I appreciate the hard questions. Historically, I acknowledge that the university has allowed some variances to our requirements around occupancy specific to research. And I was not necessarily, well, I was not involved in those variances, and so I won't try to go back and rehash them. But what I will tell you is that we acknowledge and we realize that we can't print any more land in this area of the valley. And so even internally, as we look at our own use of space in Research Park, we've made some very strategic decisions about what and what does not add value to that innovation research ecosystem. So you've seen us make a huge investment in relocating back office administrative functionalities such as HR, IT, medical billing to the downtown CBD, to downtown Salt Lake City. I think it's been a great move for the institution. Our employees that have been involved in that relocation love it. And it's opened up space for those core research companies and for some of our startup companies to expand. Again, we didn't see a huge increase. We saw a short-term increase in some vacancy, but that was quickly backfilled with those companies and those research entities that are critical to that innovation research ecosystem. I will commit personally, we need to be strategic. We're committed to being strategic about ensuring that we evaluate occupancy and companies wanting to occupy in Research Park and ensure that they align with the protective covenants and that they add value to that research innovation ecosystem.
Thank you. So another question coming in, I'm going to kind of rephrase it in the way I think it's being asked. So obviously a lot of research has gone into what this vision for Research Park wants to look like. And as you mentioned, there's a strong focus on residential and multifamily use in the initial phases of this overall development. Can you talk to what, specifically to that research component of how we got to where we are today with the vision? What studies have been conducted to examine the impact on local trails, the environment, local traffic and inversion? Just trying to get a good idea of what has informed the decisions being made today towards those things.
So we've got, well, one, we've used historical studies as a foundation to this planning exercise. So we've used the previous master planning studies that the university has done for campus as well as for Research Park. We also did a graduate student studio through the College of Architecture and Planning. I think that was 2 years ago that we led out with as far as this planning and visioning process. We did those students did community outreach and stakeholder conversations and established a couple different aspects of how we could do a new vision for the park. Those concepts were fed into this planning process. We also have a robust consultant team made up of a traffic consultant, a nationally renowned traffic consultant, Nelson Nygaard. Perkins & Will has been the lead planning firm. They've also been supported by HR&A and a strategic planning firm with specific emphasis in innovation district and Research Park planning. But we've also done a lot of work from a transportation aspect with our transportation engineer. We also brought on some ecological planning groups like Biohabitats to help us look at those sustainability and ecological planning aspects and what we can do to mitigate impacts to our natural environment and better embrace the trail connectivity support as we've gone through this process.
So thank you for that. We're getting a lot of questions, it looks like, having to do with especially the residential component of Research Park Master Plan. Another one that's come in really is, do you envision the housing component in Research Park being for university students, staff, or simply market rate housing? And will affordability be a component of this plan?
So our conversations are around a requirement that occupancy in those housing units would be restricted to university employees, faculty, staff, and students, and potentially also employees of our industry partners, those private companies that call Research Park home. I think that restriction is critical in a couple areas. One, it helps us ensure that we're doing what we can to mitigate impacts to traffic through the use of that housing component. It also ensures that the residents in that housing component are actively engaged and involved in that research and innovation ecosystem. Both of those are important aspects. And the other important aspect is staking or planting the flag and ensuring that we're creating equitable access to housing for our workforce. Housing costs are continuing to go up. Housing around the university campus is not the most affordable. And so by allowing this use and requiring an affordability aspect ensures that we create an equitable solution to part of that housing issue that we're all dealing with.
So, okay, so along that line, and I think still, especially considering the residential component, but adding a whole nother wrinkle to this conversation that all of us are dealing with is we're in the midst of a pandemic, and you know, the life of which I think nobody really knows, but potentially still is a consideration for what this overall design and development needs to look like. How do you, and I'm totally throwing a curveball at you, so sorry, Jonathan, but I'm going to blame whoever threw in this question. How is the pandemic going to change how the residential component and even the commercial component of this development is laid out? For instance, is there the potential of having less residential and less density than originally planned due to the impacts of this pandemic? Is that a potential issue?
So that's a great question. And like all of you, I don't know what the long-term effects on demand from an office aspect, lab aspect, or residential aspect is from this pandemic. We are being cognizant that there is going to be some impact to demand. Is that long-term? Is that short-term? We don't know. The master plan does not forecast demand. Again, it's a framework for how we can strategically guide and respond to development opportunities that the market is requesting. We want to be cognizant of the market and those demand forces. We do, from a planning aspect, think that the COVID-19 experience and the pandemic has added clarity and support to ensuring that we create those activated, functional outdoor spaces, creating opportunities for people to convene, creating opportunities for people to seek outdoor entertainment and walkability on trails is important. It was important when we started the planning exercise, and the pandemic experience has solidified in my mind that it is a very important aspect that we need to embrace as we continue down this planning road.
Okay. And thanks for that. And admittedly, I don't know that many of us have answers for questions specific to the pandemic and what the impact of that is going to be on our overall developments and design. Obviously, there is going to be an impact, but I imagine that that's going to be something that's that's ever evolving, and the more answers we get and the more we learn and the more we're able to kind of navigate our way through this pandemic, I think the more solutions we'll be able to determine. So kind of a curveball, but appreciate your answer. So the next one is kind of a combination of a couple of people's questions, but ultimately is, are there plans to add another off-site research park for the university somewhere off of the main campus? And ultimately, how replicable is this concept elsewhere?
Stay tuned. I think I can tell you we're having some exciting conversations with Salt Lake City and the mayor's vision for the health sciences innovation corridor. We acknowledge that Salt Lake City is our home, and we are exploring how we could potentially better embrace some programming and occupancy in some downtown locations beyond just our administrative space needs. We're also in conversations with the state about Point of the Mountain and how the prison site is redeveloped. So yes, we are exploring opportunities for a second innovation district research park annex, if you will. What was the second part of that question, Josh?
Just ultimately the replicability, if that's a word. Maybe I made it up, and if I did, check one off for me.
So that is absolutely an important piece of the puzzle. And what has made our research park so successful today is that physical adjacency to the institution. A research park and innovation district isn't just a name. There's programming that's critical to facilitating that type of an ecosystem. We're able to do that easily through our direct adjacency to campus. But again, if we invest in a research park off campus or out in the valley, it's all about what programming we bring, what's the governance model, and how do we facilitate that ecosystem. But it's doable. It's just historically, if you look nationally, it's much easier to accomplish if you've got that anchor institution directly adjacent or incorporated into the planning and the programming.
So another question, and it just has to do with funding for and ultimately what the mechanism for funding to pay for infrastructure upgrades, i.e. sidewalks, intersection upgrades, outdoor spaces, water features, etc. What does that look like in the minds of the university?
So we're going to have to explore funding solutions. We're going to have to get creative there. We are working with Salt Lake City and the RDA about the potential for a CRA designation over a research park. The RDA board has approved that exploration work, and we're working right now with RDA staff through that process. And that TIF district could represent some funding. We're also looking at potential grant opportunities from the federal government through the CARES Act and other mechanisms to help us create some funding mechanisms. And then as an institution, we realize that we're going to have to lead out and invest in some of those infrastructure improvements as well. So we already today are working on some trail connectivity and sidewalk improvements over the next 12 months to begin the initial phase of opening up that airpine connector, creating more campus connections for pedestrian and active transportation between main campus and health sciences. We don't have all the funding answers today, but we are beginning to explore different ways to fund some of those improvements, such as the parking, the transit improvements, et cetera. It's going to be a community-based solution, and we're going to have to explore different funding pathways.
Sure. So what I'm hearing is opportunities are available for those private partners who may have insight on what creative funding mechanisms might look like.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. So we're getting close on time, and I am going to ask one more question, but just everybody who who did ask a question that we're not able to get to. Again, thanks for your interest. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer everything, but I think that this is a continued conversation that Jonathon sounds like is willing to have. I know we at NAIOP are very interested in continuing the conversation and being, as involved as we can. So feel free to send questions my way or to NAIOP at large. And Jonathon has also included some of his contact information. So unless he is screening his calls, feel free to reach out to Jonathon. And any complaints you might have, please feel free to send those to uli.org. In the meantime, last question I have for you, Jonathon, really is a question of timing. So can you address what the timing of phases and ultimately when you hope to start breaking ground on phase 1 of this overall master development would be?
So timing has definitely been one aspect that's been affected by COVID. We had initially kicked off this master planning process and visioning process with the goal of completing it in June. We have extended that and we're targeting a fall completion. It is my hope that we can wrap this up before the end of the calendar year. I think you will see some of our existing ground lessees move forward with some redevelopment opportunities in the next 12 to 18 months once we complete the planning process and formally adopt the new protective covenants that would incorporate some of these expanded land uses. But timing, again, we need to be flexible. We need to respond to market conditions and just be prepared to strategically respond as demand supports development. But I would like to wrap this up by the end of the calendar year and support some redevelopment that we're already having conversations about for next year.
Awesome. Well, speaking of wrapping things up, we're at that time. So we're going to do that here on this discussion. Jonathon, thank you so much for sharing your vision and the overall University of Utah's development and master plan here. I think it's incredibly exciting. You know that. I think a lot of the people in our audience today are going to find this information incredibly useful and interesting. And I think probably generating, if there wasn't already, a lot of interest in how this continues to move forward. So thank you for your time. If there was one last comment that you wanted to leave for this greater NAIOP audience, what would that be?
Reach out. Again, this is a work in progress. This is an amenity and a foundational development for the state, for the city. I want your feedback. I want your suggestions. My door is open. My phone is on. I may not be in the office every day, but reach out. I'm more than happy to meet over Zoom. I'm more than happy to mask up and meet out at the park. I want your feedback. I want your input. We want to make this an exciting opportunity for the state and the city to embrace. So bring it on. Let us know where you think we're getting it wrong. Let us know where you think we should continue to push. This is something we all deserve to be proud of. And I very much am interested in each of your perspectives and feedback. I want to make myself available. So I truly appreciate this opportunity, Josh. I truly appreciate NAIOP asking for this opportunity, and let's continue the dialogue. We're a great state because we are open to collaborating together as a community.
Unless you're from BYU, right? Just kidding. Okay. Well, thanks again, Jonathon, and thanks everybody that chimed in. It was a great conversation. We will be publishing this on our NAIOP website shortly. So if you want to revisit or share, or if there's somebody that you think should be listening in on the conversation we just had, watch for that to be published, and feel free to reference as you will. At the end of the day, we will be doing this again next month, so please feel free to chime in on NAIOP Live once a month and Hopefully we'll continue to get a lot of interest from the community. In the meantime, thanks again, Jonathan, and feel free, everybody, to reach out to him or to me if you have questions, concerns, complaints, or just generally interested in finding out more about what this looks like. So on that note, we'll go ahead and leave everybody to their day. Thank you for chiming in.